Order! Shut up. Okay, I've been told by Bex before I even allowed to speak, we're going to open up with something called Showtime. Let's hear it. Okay, good evening to you all, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maurice Williamson. I'm going to be your MC tonight. You may remember me from a previous life as a Member of Parliament and so on. I did 30 years, and you get less for murder. I'm now an Auckland councillor, so don't hold that against me. I'm a director of Auckland Transport, so don't even hold that even more against me. But we've got a few important announcements so you know what to do. First of all, I'm not going to tell you how to vacate the building if there's an emergency. You're old enough to find your own bloody way out. But you're not old enough to work out how to go to the toilet, because it's quite hard. You've got to go out there, back through the next bar, and then in and around. Maybe ask someone at the bar and they'll take you by the hand and lead you to the toilet. So that's important. Now, I've also been told I've got to open with a 10-minute karakia. And, oh, hang on, sorry, that's my Auckland Transport. Got the wrong agenda here. First of all, a big thank you to the Milford Cruising Club. Cruising does mean different things. We know a few people that are good at cruising. But what I can just say is at short notice, just phenomenal that you were able to make the venue available. You all probably know you were going to be in the city, and now it's been out here, so well done to the Cruising Club. Please help them. Yeah, look, clapping's great, but actually using the bar a lot will be even better for me. So let's get on with it. Right, well, you know why we're here tonight. We're here because of one individual who's sort of carved out the most amazing career for himself in the world of media. We're going to have a number of various items along the way. But I just want to say to you, I've known Cam since he was 13, because John and Margaret Slater were really very good friends of mine back when I lived in the same street as they did in Morburn Road in Epsom. And Cam was just a young kid going to school. And he used to quite like coming down to my place and listening to the guitars and the stereo, because we had quite good sort of band gear in those days.
Your neighbours didn't?
No, the neighbours didn't like it. Actually, several suburbs away didn't like listening. But so we had a really great time, and I've known Cam all of those years along the way. He's the most famous Fijian person I've ever met. I've met quite a few, but he's the most famous Fijian, born in Suva. Do you still have citizenship there, or?
No, I'm a Kiwi citizen.
Okay, you're a Kiwi citizen. Right, well, that's cool. The message I've got here, now some people have written these notes and they're really hard to follow. It says, the message tonight is about respect and ability to work across the political spectrum. I don't even know what that means. I don't know how to do that. Okay, well, I'll leave that one off. Even those who are opposed to your views, well, that's most people. There are some rules that you've got to abide by tonight. There is no walking up, getting in the face of people and making a fist with a pistol with your fingers, okay? Anyone who does that will be actually suspended for 3 months. Which is what it should have been anyway, but never mind. And we've got a few apologies tonight from 2 or 3 MPs. We've got an apology from Shane Jones, an apology from John Banks, and those are apologies for not being able to be here. We've got lots of other apologies for actually being here, but I won't go through that. All right, that's enough. I've got covered that. Oh, apology from Troy Bowker as well. I think Cam's told me to do. So we're going to start off the program as the very first thing tonight, which I really don't quite know how this is going to work. A phone message from Christopher Luxon is going to be played to us by the screen or by a...
No, it didn't come through.
It didn't come through? Could you not have told me?
Yeah, it's not fun.
Could you just not have told me and I don't make a plonker of myself saying there's going to be a
Come on, Morris.
Prime Minister's speech and then it turns out there isn't one? Okay, well, we can move on 5 more minutes into the program. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you a man who was around Parliament for nearly the whole time I was there. In fact, I think, Barry, you were there when I started in '87 and have been there for a while. Barry's had an incredible long service in the Parliamentary Press Gallery and has just got so much knowledge. He knows where everybody is buried and he knows exactly how the place works and when to say things and when not to. So can I get Barry up here? You're going to give a quick 20 minutes, I understand, about Cameron. But it's all right, you don't need to do the full thing if you don't. Ladies and gentlemen, Barry Soper.
Well, this is ridiculous, really, because I was asked to interview Cam Slater. I don't think Cam's ever been interviewed in his life. And, you know, what would he say to any question that he was asked? I think it's pretty bloody obvious, actually. He's an interesting man, Cam Slater, because, like a number of people, we started off probably on the wrong side, that he thought I was belligerent. I thought he was obnoxious, and never the twain shall meet. I was going to say nothing's changed. But yeah, no, I'm honoured to be asked to talk to Cam. I haven't talked to him for a while, actually, and you know, what do you ask somebody like Cam Slater? I mean, Cam sort of, he claims that some politicians quiver at the mention of his name. And it's true that politicians do quiver at the mention of some people's names. And I remember there was one Cam that quivered at the mention of my name when he heard me on radio. That was a very close friend of Winston Peters, Bill English. That when Bill was about to be rolled by Don Brash as the leader of the National Party, I was being interviewed by Paul Holmes in the morning, and Paul, as a throwaway line, said, "Is he a dead man walking?" And I said, "No, more like a twitching corpse."
That's because David did the numbers.
That's because I've done the numbers. And within minutes, my phone rings at home, and it's Bill English. And he had my phone number because Bill's son went to primary school with my son, and they were good mates, and they're still good mates today. But it wasn't a very pleasant telephone call, I can tell you. The abuse flowed, and the invective was like nothing I've probably heard from Bill before. And I said to Bill, "Well, did you hear it, Bill? Did you hear it?" And he said, "Well, no, I didn't. Somebody told me about it." And I said, "For fuck's sake, go back and have a listen." It was a throwaway line. It was light-hearted. And that's what Cam has always claimed. You know, when he gets into a bit of shtuck, he always claims that, "Look, I wasn't serious. It's light-hearted. I'm into free speech." The poor old Cam, though, has realised that speech isn't always free. It's cost him quite a lot of money over the years. But Cam, politicians, which you obviously write a lot about, and you know a lot about, who's your favourite? And don't say Winston Peters.
Who's my favourite? There's lots of favourites. If you look at prime ministers, for example, I admire Helen Clark and her ability to manage that caucus. She stared down a couple of attempts at rolling her. I didn't agree with her politics. I campaigned really hard to get rid of her. You know, the Darth Sidious of New Zealand politics is what I describe her. She's still a malignant force, but I respect her abilities. You know, every time she croaks out something from, you know, the depths of Mount Albert. It's always with her, you know, with you. I'm pretty sure she's on the payroll of the Chinks, though. Absolutely.
I thought you were going to say Eden Park.
Not on their payroll. You know, I quite admired John Key for what he, you know, he was quite shallow, really. He wanted a few things. He wanted to be the longest-serving national prime minister, which he was never going to do under UP. He wanted a knighthood, which is what he got. He wanted to change the flag. I told him that he wasn't going to be able to change the flag. He stupidly assumed that the Labour Party would back him on that because it was in their manifesto that they were going to want to change the flag. It was, as soon as you announce it, they'll oppose it, which is what they did. But he disappointed me in the end just through his lack of courage. You know, like, if he had stuck around, whether or not he was allowed to stick around, I suggested that the next election, where Bill English failed to exhibit any leadership or management or anything like that, that those negotiations would have gone a whole lot different. And, you know, I'm pretty sure John Key would have been a deal maker and gone, you betcha we'll do what Winston wants on that. But he quit and shuffled off and thought he's actually stayed quite silent, which is quite good for a politician. You know, actually I have to say Muldoon. I did despise Muldoon when I was younger. But all those smug greenies that are driving around in their electric cars are all powered by his Think Big projects. And he was so wrong on so many levels, but he actually believed in the country and he made some decisions which we all thought at the time would Think Big, but in hindsight it turned out to be pretty good. So I'd rate him up there. I actually met the little pig. Actually, I met him at Doug Graham's election win at his headquarters when Muldoon came in to congratulate him on winning. That was very rare at that time, wasn't it, Dad? Yeah. And that's when I met him, and that's when I realised just how short he was. You know, very short, but the stature of the man. You know, some of the things he did. You know, you kind of have to pat him on the back for that. I know Morris was out with a sharpened stake at his funeral, you know, just to make sure that the little grunter was dead. but you know what? He did what he thought was right. And since MMP, we don't have politicians. Well, we do have some, but there's just a scant few. But most politicians don't do what's right for New Zealand. John Key was one of the worst at that. He just wanted to get polls, get the next election, get the next election, get the next. That's what he wanted to do. That's all it was. He didn't have a driving force in it.
I remember Muldoon speaking of the man. Somebody said to him about Jim Macleay, who took over from him, "Are you going to be a thorn in Macleay's side?" And Muldoon goes, "More like a little prick." And he was. But you would have heard Cam, and probably most of you know, that Cam said Dad. And of course, Cam grew up with politics because his father, John Slater, was the president of the National Party. And I knew John before I knew Cam. And John and I used to have many dinners out and talk politics. Just what influence, I guess, did your dad have over you? I'm not saying what influence did he have on your views, because I'm sure he wouldn't admit to having much influence over that, but what influence did he have?
Well, you know, I can remember as a kid when Dad was like the Auckland Divisional Chairman of the National Party, and Chinese ambassador rang him up, and you know, I picked up the phone and rushed off and got Dad, because there were all landlines in those days. And the Chinese ambassador had rung Dad so that he could pass a message on to the Prime Minister that you really mustn't mention Taiwan or Taipei or the Republic of China and everything. There was Dad's very politely telling the Chinese ambassador that we live in a country that we had free speech. that we can say and do what we like, and we don't have the government telling us what to do very often and then hanging up on the guy. And Dad didn't teach me politeness, but he taught me to watch and to listen and to do those things. The person who had but I did watch Dad.
Why are you emotional here, Cam?
Watching Mum deal with politicians, drivers, the staff. I can remember Dad would be dealing with the politicians in the lounge and stuff like that, and Mum would be going out to the cars of all the ministers, drivers and things like that, and she would say, "Come inside," and they would Mum, I think Mum, they must have been channeling Mum when they wrote The Castle, because Mum would say to all the drivers, "Come in, go down to the pool room." And she taught me that the people who know the most about what goes on in politics are the staff, the drivers, the hairdressers, and you want to know what's going on, who's reading who's not reading someone, whatever. You ask the drivers, the security guards as well, at those gates, everyone thinks they're all going out, we went out separately, nobody knows, and everybody knows, right? And it's the staff, and Mum taught me to respect the staff, and she would sit there and lecture these people, and she knows that the politicians too, with their drivers, they ask them, "Oh, what do you think of this?" So she was dripping wisdom into the drivers' ears that probably ended up changing some policy or doing stuff like that. So, a good influence at home on politics. I mean, when I say that I've met every Prime Minister from Muldoon, including Muldoon, it's true. I have. I've met them all, as you have. Some are good, some are bad, and only one was evil.
Who was the evil one? Oh no, I shouldn't ask. No, I know the answer to this. She's written a biography recently.
Well, it should be in the fiction section.
Why do you think, Cam, that when it comes to you, I mean, your blog is a bit like Coronation Street. People would never admit to reading it. So I'm really sitting here talking to Ken Barlow tonight.
I've never watched an episode of Coronation Street, so I don't know if that's an insult or not.
So they would never admit to actually reading it and getting information from it. But I can tell you, as a journalist, Cam has tipped me off to a number of stories.
You've won awards.
I have won awards, yeah. And one of the stories that he took me off to, and I thought, this is part of the Sky stuff, Cam's often a long shot here. And it was during the COVID lockdowns. And Cam rang me and he said, look, the lockdowns are legal. And I said, don't be ridiculous, Cam. Everybody's bloody locked down, nobody's arguing. It's legal, the cops are out there enforcing it. And Cam said, no, mate, it's illegal. They've been told. They've had emails. So I did, and he knew, but I did some digging and realised that what he had told me was right, and wrote a story on it. And of course, they changed legislatively. They changed the rules to make them legal. But the point is that I'm getting to, Cam, is that journalism these days, I just wonder, and I don't want you to be necessarily negative about journalists, because there are some very good ones out there, but where do you see journalism at the moment?
All right, look, journalism is at a crossroads. I mean, there's a reason why I asked you to speak here. I've got immense respect for your body of work. We may not have agreed on anything, but I've always seen people. Something. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't, because Barry is one of the few journalists who worked in the gallery who plays with a straight bat, right? He really does. I didn't know what his politics were in life, and I literally don't care what it is. I've always known that you have played with a straight bat, and that's come from Labour people who have talked to me, national people who have talked to me, New Zealand First people who have talked to me. They always say Soper plays with a straight bat, and it's true, you do. There's a whole lot of journalists, particularly the younger ones today. I think that they've been let down by the belief of having a diploma in journalism or a degree in journalism makes them a journalist. It doesn't. It doesn't make them a journalist any more than me deciding to write a story about Len Brown or tipping you off to something, getting the documents, doing the legwork, standing it up. I mean, you know, I got that leaked information out of my sources. That they know that.
Who was your source?
I'm going to tell you. My source was sufficiently clear enough that I had copies of the documentation, so that when I did an official information act, I knew exactly what the document name was. The same thing happened when RV Yemeni was banned from coming into New Zealand. I had a source that provided me with that. I got internal memos that were sent between the New Zealand Police and Interpol, and everybody poo-pooed it and ridiculed me for it and said, oh, those screenshots are photoshopped and all of that. Yeah, I was right. I had the screenshots, I had the images, I had the evidence. And all too often we see journalists that write nothing stories, or you know, that you can read the whole story through and you get to the last bit and they say, oh, we've approached Cam Slater for comment on this, and the story was published 5 minutes before I was approached for comment. Right? And that's at your organisation, sadly. And he's just a bitter and twisted little fuckwit. He's
going to really be.
No one's ever going to die wondering what I think. You know, he won awards of things that I think that's what nags at him. That I know that some of his awards that he's won and the accolades that he's got are stories that I gave him the leads to. But one thing David Fisher always does, he always bites the hand that feeds him. And he will eventually run out of cat stories and Kerry and you know, he'll just shuffle off. And I'll say the same thing to David Fisher that I said to Lisa Rowan when I was standing on a balcony in Tel Aviv doing a live thing at 9 o'clock at night in Israel, which was the morning in New Zealand or something like that. And she said to me, oh, you know, are you going to apologise to the Prime Minister? And I said, what for? So, well, you know, you've embarrassed him. I said, well, that's his problem, not mine. And she said, well, yeah, that's a bit offhand to say that. And I said, well, I've met every Prime Minister since Rob Muldoon. And one thing's for sure, when they leave being the Prime Minister, their phone literally stops ringing. No one cares who they are. Nobody wants to hear a peep out of them. And in fact, we really just that they immigrate. And I'll still be here. And I'll still be doing what I'm doing. And, you know, that was 2014. And here we are in 2025.
Well, I go back further than that. I remember Muldoon saying to me once from the stage, looking down and scowling at me, accusing me of hectoring him, and said, Mr. Soper, I'll be here long after you're gone. I thought, we'll see about that, Rob.
Did you stop by Pereira Cemetery to pass on your regards?
The thing is about, you know, Cam and John, of course, knew Rob Muldoon well, and indeed so did Winston. When I was a young journalist interviewing Muldoon, he used to drive me absolutely balmy. But he would always answer a question with a question. And after he got out and after he said he was going to be a little prick to Jim McLean, which he was, he used to ring me. I used to get this call at 5 in the afternoon, and never ever once called me Barry. It would always be Mr. Soper, what are you doing? I go, Rob, I'm working. What do you do? Come up for a scotch. And you'd be out as we call it Siberia. Winston knows where the...
Only one?
Well, no, not one. So on the odd occasion, I'd say, okay, yeah, go up. And I learned, probably as a young journalist, more from Muldoon than I learned from any Prime Minister I sat and talked to him. And he had an impeccable memory and told me so much about politics and reading reading natures, people that are involved in politics. So, having said that, a person that's been involved in politics almost as long as I have, Winston Peters. You expecting a nice roast from Winston tonight?
Look, when I asked Winston, I rang him up and said, look, I'm having this event, 20-year event. He said, oh, yeah, I'll come along. I said, I want you to do a roast. He said, this is an all-day event. So, yeah, I expect him to be merciless.
As he always is with the media.
Totally.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I mean, politics in some ways is theatre. And I always say that we sit on the sidelines, people like Cam and I, and
I'm not on the sideline.
well, no, you're not, but we're theatre critics. And I think politics is a performance. The business is a performance. And the person that scowls at the media these days more than Muldoon probably ever has is Winston Peters. And of course he gets away with it because most of the scowling that he does, the public see it as being justified.
Most of the public don't like politicians very much at all. They despise the media. Like, car salesmen have got a better reputation. You know, car boot lawyers have got a better reputation than the media. And so Winston's going to profit all day long attacking the media. And now, with technology the way it is, he can speak directly to the public, he can do live streams, he can use X, he can use, you know, Fastbook or, you know, any of the other ones. But that's how you bypass the media. Podcasts is how you bypass the media. They won't do anything longer than 15 minutes. I tell you, in 2.5 hours or 3 hours sitting with somebody, they can't hide. They cannot hide. They can't keep their veneer up. You know, I doubt Christopher Luxon could sit down for more than about 40 minutes with me. And it's not saying that I'm going to tear him apart, because that's not how I do my podcast. But you can't keep using bumper sticker slogans like Ardern or what Luxon does. It's all rehearsed, it's all performative. And after 20 minutes, they run out. And that's how you get to see the true politician. The politician that, by the way, that I know, that I've seen because I've spent hours at a time with them, you know, in Mum and Dad's lounge or whatever. You know, Judy Shipley came to my sister's 18th birthday, you know, because she was in town at the time. These people all passed through my life, and I just sat there and watched and listened, mostly listened to Mum, and learned which politicians are genuine and which are there to favour themselves. I mean, they're all narcissists, everybody is, but they're just worse narcissists than the rest. Oh.
Well, thank you very much, Cam.
Thanks, Barry.
Welcome, Mike.
Used to it, we don't have to go to the microphone. Okay, just quickly, there's been a few more apologies for tonight come in. Chloe Swarbrick, the only woman I know who wants to save a planet that she doesn't even live on. There's another apology in from the Member of Parliament for Wellington Central, who all the doctors' wives and that happily voted for, called Tamata Paul. And she's the one that's in the defund the police. So you'll know who she is. And Marama Davidson's at an international violence conference telling them it's only white cis male that causes all the violence. So they can't be with us tonight. What I'm going to do now, this is not in the script, but I'm going to give just a couple of minutes break because we want you to keep these people funded. And you won't keep them funded if you're all just sitting there listening. So we'll break for 5 minutes. Please refill your glasses. Show some gratitude that these people gave us a venue at the last minute. And then we'll start again in 5. Okay, can I get a bit of touch now, please? Now I need 2 people at the bar, so we're going to let them find their break and we'll start on with the next part of the program.
Yeah, will do.
It sounded, what came through was an apology, but it was more an angry grumpiness. It was from Te Pāti Māori, and they said, we're never going anywhere where we can't wear cowboy hats while we're at the function. So, good idea to have decided no cowboy hats tonight, I noticed. It's gone, that's great. Okay, we get to the next step of the program, and this is another blogger. You'll all know David Farrar and his famous blog as well. He and Cam were sort of almost competitors, but almost sort of collaborators as well. Different styles, but also covering similar stories. So, can I get you, David, to come up? Tell us a few things. I've got stories, politics, blogs, and how you expose those stories, and I'll let you go to it. There we go.
Good to be here. For those who can't tell, I got laryngitis, but that wasn't going to keep me from being here tonight. Neither were the Cook Islands. I returned from this morning. I was meant to get back Thursday night, but we were delayed 1.5 days, so I landed in Wellington at around 10 o'clock this morning, and 55 minutes at home before I jumped on the Uber back to the airport so I could make it up here for Cam's function tonight. I have to say it's really good to see Winston here tonight. It's actually the first time I've caught up with Winston since he was Foreign Minister, not this time. Not the time before, but the time before that. I remember it well because we were in the Select Committee corridor and I was chatting to Paul Plummer and Winston came up and said, gee, to Paul and noticed me and proceeded to loudly inform me and the entire corridor that he was suing me for defamation. And something that after Winston went off, Paul said, I always wondered if Winston read Kiwi blog. I guess it does. I actually, Winston did get a bit worried about this, so I went to a friend who worked for Radio New Zealand and said, oh, Winston just said he's going to sue me for defamation. You know, should I go get a lawyer? And she went, oh, he's going to sue me also. I said, oh, when was that? She goes, Thursday. I did feel better after that. Now, being a blogger and known as a friend of Cam's is always a fun thing to do. I don't share two of the most common questions I get. The first one, and I've kept count of how often this has happened, on 436 occasions, someone, often an MP or a staffer, has called me and said, Dave, could you go talk to Cam and ask him to change something he's written? They never go to Cam direct. They always thought somehow coming to me was the good idea. And I've also kept track of how often, for every time I go to Cam and say, oh, so-and-so's a bit upset, etc. And my strike rate is 0. But they still come through.
I got a call once from Jason Eve, and he said to me, he said, oh, the boss is a little unhappy. He's doing too fucking bad. And he said, oh, he wants you to change that post. I said, well, I haven't received the check. And he said, well, can you just change it, you know? And I said, well, no. I said, if the boss wants it changed, the boss can ring me. I'd rather talk to the organ grinder than the monkey. And he said, so that's a no then? I said, yes. He said, oh, well, then, you know, I said, well, what? And the answer was, oh, well, we might take you off. I said, see how that works out for you. And they didn't. And even though the politicians say they don't talk to me, they do. And that's because I don't change. The one thing I did change, I wrote a blog post I was given the information by another MP. The information was wrong, it was about Chris Carter. And Chris Carter picked up the phone and rang me. Said, Cam, you got that wrong. I said, okay, well, I'll remove the post and I'll put up an apology. And he said, oh, thanks for that. And Chris Carter and I have been in contact ever since. Now he's on the left. But he picked the phone up. And that showed courage, and I respect courage. What I don't respect is weakness. Remember when Chris Carter was doing some shenanigans in the background and undermining leaders and stuff like that? But I was given some information about him by a national MP, and that made it up, basically. So I withdrew it and apologised to Chris Carter, but I admired his courage to pick up the phone and ring.
Now, the other question that I often would get asked in the early years of Cam is, why is Cam's blog called Whale Oil Beef Hot? And I would never stop enjoying going to them, say it quickly with an Irish accent, and see the look of comprehension come on. People for years thought there was some deep symbolic meaning that came in my whales, and it's like, it's a fucking joke. It's just a joke.
But it has been a joke. You know, Nicky Yager wrote his stupid book, and he took it all seriously. Like, half the stuff that he wrote about was a fucking joke. You know, we did things because A, we could, and B, it was fun. And that was the only thing that drove us to do anything. It was fun, and we could do it.
Now, as you know, I've been a blogger along with Cam for this time, but there's a big difference though between Cam and I, or more than one difference you might say. Cam is the only professional blogger in New Zealand, as in he makes a living off it. For 21 years, Cam has lived off the blog. No one else has done that. This was the era before Substack, and that's quite amazing achievement. Blog's my hobby. My day job, for those who don't know, I run a polling company. But I do have to say that I'm starting to think you shouldn't trust the polls, because for the last 9 months, every month Winston goes up and up in the polls. I was the most popular party leader in Parliament, so I look at these numbers and go, oh, fuck.
Did you make the numbers up like you did for Bill English? Well, no, that wasn't for Bill English. You did it for Murray, and then Murray made the numbers up.
Okay, look, I'll tell this story, right? It's a good one. I'll slight diversion. In 1999, I was doing Nationals polls, and we weren't meant to poll Thursday night, because what's the point? Friday is the election. You can't campaign, really. But McCully rang up and said, no, we just want to know, can you do a poll Thursday night? So, it's stupid, you can't change anything, but we did it. And it showed us 8% behind. The actual election result was 8% behind. Then Jeff Grant, the campaign manager, phoned me up. And I just softened to him. They're not going to make decisions on it. So I told Jeff, we're around 6% behind. He goes, thanks, Sam. And then Jeff gets a call half an hour later from McCully. McCully's like, what's it looking like? And Jeff goes, we're around 4 or 5%. And then the next day, at the final campaign committee meeting, 6 o'clock in the morning, Jenny goes, so what's the final poll, Murray? We're only 2% behind. Oh, fuck. So ever since that day, I've never sugarcoated it to try and take this thing away. But look, going back to Cam, 20 years, professional blogger, there's the difference. Blogs have come and go, people keep up as their hobby, but Cam, he's done merchandising, he's done subscriptions, he's now become a broadcaster. It is quite exceptional. Now, he's had a few challenges during those times. He's had quite a few lawsuits. He's won a few. He's lost 1 or 2 on appeal. He should have won those ones. He's had a stroke. He's had that wonderful book in 2014, which projected national to the biggest ever majority. You might be interested in that book. Of course, I have my own chapter in that. I counted up how many times it got mentioned during the election campaign. There were 4,000 stories on it. In the poll,
Yeah, that's domination.
when we asked people what was the most important issue, 1.1% of New Zealanders said that was the most important issue, but there were 4,000 stories on it. Quite exceptional. Now look, people ask, what's a blogger? Are we part of the media? You hear about legacy media, mainstream media, traditional media. I don't see there's a difference now. You've got journalists who now write purely on Substack. That's effectively a blog. Bernard Hickey now makes his living off Substack. Lots of lefties. It's interesting that Cam has had 3 different sides, but they keep coming to whichever one he's at. They don't go to Whale Oil because of the name. They didn't go to the BFD because of the name. They go because it's Cam. And I think that's the lesson for journalism today, is people form a relationship with individuals. They like them, they trust them. They may agree, they may not agree, but they identify with them. If you think about News Talk ZB, I don't think it's the News Talk ZB brand that people associate with. They like Mike, they like Heather, they tolerate her husband sometimes. Etc. But this is the world we live in, where people search for someone who they think they say what they believe. And in both politics and to a degree journalism, you get sort of too often just talking points or a bit of balance each side. Like, you take an example where yesterday in the Te Pahi, Mariko leader came out and said his personal hero is the military dictator of Sierra Leone. And the media just do a story. He has been criticised by David Seymour for this, which, it's just a minor thing, because none of them are willing to go out there and say, this is crazy. You've got someone saying their personal hero is a guy who said countries do badly with democracy.
Then Todd Muller got mercilessly shamed because he had a marker hat.
Exactly. So I think that is part of what Cam's success has been, is you may, like me, sometimes read what Cam has said and go, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. But you know it can be Cam. So look, that's all I really wanted to cover. It's been a lot of fun spending 20 years competing with Cam, occasionally collaborating with him, sometimes disagreeing, sometimes agreeing.
It's hard working with a Pinko.
I think everyone's a Pinko compared to you.
Simon's definitely not a Pinko.
No, Simon, well, I don't know. He's a bit soft when it comes to his dogs.
You haven't seen him boot them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to keep this thing moving. Do anyone want an update on the rugby score? Yes, please. Well, I'm going to tell you something. There's less than 10 minutes to go, and it's 28-27. I'm not telling you which way around, but it's 28-27. There's less than 10 minutes to go. Okay, up next is Chris Trotter. And Chris Trotter needs no introduction for the phenomenal years he's been around writing. But Chris, I've got to say, there's something about you that has really got me panicked. I used to see you as an absolute Trotskyite lefty shocker and couldn't bear the things that I ever saw or heard from you. And in recent years, I think you make more sense than just about anybody I bloody read. And either I've changed, either I've got really woke in the wrong direction, or you've come over to the more centre-right sort of views of the world than you had earlier on. But Chris writes some fantastic stuff. Incredibly intellectual, but incredibly good stuff. And I just cannot wait to hear you speak tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. It's a little strange to be here, I have to say, because looking around the room, this is a celebration of the New Zealand right, I think it's fair to say. And as Morris hinted at, I find myself, as he apparently does, agreeing more and more with people that 30 or 40 years ago I would have drawn my sword against. And I wonder sometimes what that's all about. And Cam and I have talked about this at length and on the podcast, which went up a couple of days ago. We rehearsed those thoughts. And I was talking to one of the people attending this event earlier. And the thought that came to my mind then, and I'll repeat it now, is that what it's come down to, I think, is that there is a New Zealand which political actors on both the left and the right love and cherish. Its history has been a struggle between left and right, and that is the fate of all democracies, essentially. But at the heart of that struggle was the country itself, and what both the right and the left loved and cherished about the country. Its egalitarian spirit, its absolute demand that people behave fairly, its suspicion of wealth, but it's impatient with those who will not help themselves. That New Zealand was loved and cherished by right-wing parties and left-wing parties. And what I find now is that people who were once on the left, people who are probably still on the right, are opposed by people who have a completely different idea about what New Zealand was, New Zealand is, and God help us, what New Zealand should be. And that is the divide. That is why I think I find myself standing alongside people who fall into the category of conservatives. And that is why so few people who today fall under the category of left would have nothing whatsoever to do with me. I am a traitor. I am an apostate. What?
Well,
Yeah, but it's a serious divide, because what is being demanded of New Zealand now is that it repudiate its past, it abandon its values, it takes all the 120, 130 years that it took to build a country which the world admired. As I said to Cam the other day when we were recording the podcast, I've got a set of American encyclopedias at home, Richard's Topical Encyclopedia. And the entry under New Zealand has the subheading, the world's best governed nation. And that was in 1952, I think. And that sort of pride that we used to take is no longer recognized by I mean, it's a minority of the country. It's not a majority, but the great problem, it seems to me, is that it's a minority with power. Cultural power, media power, judicial power. When I was, waving red flags around in my early 20s, we didn't have any power. We were just commies on the street protesting at, Springbok tours or Vietnam Wars or whatever it was.
Dirty, filthy comments.
That's right. You can always rely upon Cam. But the difference between waving a flag around in 1972, 73 and being in control of the public service and the judiciary and the news media in 2025 is the issue of power. The only power that we wielded, such as it was, against apartheid or a war in Vietnam, was moral power. That was all we had. But the people today, they wield real power, serious power, power that can make people lose their jobs, power that can send people to prison. That's real power. And that's taken 50 years to build. And I have to confess, I cast my vote for Winston's party in 2023, and I really did hope that any coalition that he was a part of would roll this back. And I have no doubt that New Zealand First wants to roll it back, but I gotta say, Cam, I got my serious doubts about National.
I've been telling people for a long time.
You have. And that's why I think Cam and I get on. That's why I think you first asked me to write for you when you were the editor of Truth, the last editor of Truth, as I recall. And I remember at the time people said, "Oh, you can't write for Truth. You can't write for Cam Slater." Well, why not? I said, "Why not? I mean, I may drop a seed or two into the minds of those who partake of Cam's particular brand of breakfast cereal, but who knows?"
But like I said in the podcast, I've been reading your columns since I was a young man living in Wellington, right, in my 20s, and I've always enjoyed reading what you write. It gave me an insight into what was happening in the left.
Well, the other thing, that I must say in relation to that, Richard Long. Now, Richard Long, I think it's fair to say, and the fact that he worked for a national government for a while tends to back this up, wasn't a leftist. Right? But Richard Long asked me if I wanted a column in his newspaper, in the Dominion. Now, it would be a very cold day in hell when Sinead Bouchier asked me to supply a column to Stuff. Right? And that's the difference. That's the difference between then and now.
But that's why I've always had you writing on wherever I've been and able to get you to write, because the very last thing I've ever wanted is to create an echo chamber.
Exactly.
Because everybody sits there nodding and sagely agreeing with each other, and they might be completely batshit crazy, like there's gun followers, for example. So that's why I've always had you writing on those things, and very often, more often than not, I'd be sitting there going, "Oh, that's a good point that you raised here, Chris."
Yeah, I'll tell you the thing about writing for conservative outlets. It is, apart from anything else, it is an extremely useful discipline, because as somebody who comes to political issues from a very different perspective, what it imposes upon you is this obligation to think about how what you write is going to be received, to think about how you couch your ideas in a way that they won't be instantly rejected, but that you learn how to speak to people who don't agree with you. And if that's not the definition of a working democracy, I don't know what is. And I want to thank Cam Slater for giving me the opportunity.
We used to do that little TV show with Martin Bradbury.
Yes, I do.
In that scary little house in Dirty Grey Lynn there. And he was saying to everyone who was on the left that he'd get me on with, you've got to get Cam Slater. And I knew that he was saying that because, well, you and I are mates and we talked. He's like, Cam, Martin wants me to get you. I said, well, no one can get
Good
you.
luck with that, he said.
Good luck with that. But I then made it my little personal challenge that whenever I was on with somebody who I knew was supposed to get me, to get them to say,
Actually, I agree with Cam Slater.
that's right, and it's my little, I still do it. I still do it when I'm on the panel to get somebody to say, oh, actually I agree with Cam on that. And Martin Bradbury couldn't work it out. And it was just playing as a game to me. And I mean, I played that game with Brian Edwards, and you know Brian pretty well. He's a very sharp person when it comes to media. And it was just after I'd been made editor of Truth, and I was being interviewed on The Nation. I was down in that studio there in Flower Street, down in the basement, and I turned up on time, and Brian Edwards was sitting there, and the makeup girl came out and she said, all right, who wants to go first? I said, well, I'm only going to be 5 minutes, so you've got a lot of work to get going on Brian. So you better start with him. And he went off to the makeup area, which was down a corridor, and then he came back and sat down and drank his cup of tea. And I noticed he hadn't brought his folder back with him. So I went in to do my makeup because Ralston hadn't dragged himself out of bed yet. And I went into the makeup room, I sat in the chair, and there was Brian Edwards' folder.
And of course you didn't look.
Of course I did. And I read it all and knew what his attack lines were going to be and everything. And then when I got my makeup done, I came back out with the folder in hand and handed it back to Brian Edwards, and he went puce.
Yes.
He was steaming. He said, did you look at it? I said, of course I did, Brian. Good luck with those attack lines. And then when you had to line up to go in, if there was 3 of you, because they'd want to mic you up, and then you'd have to go in and plug in, and they'd put you in an order. And I was at the door, and you waited for the red light to go off, and I had Bill Ralston who turned up, and he was still smelling the scotch and the doobie he smoked in the morning when he got up. And then there was Brian Edwards. And just as the light went off, I turned around and said, you know what your problem is, Brian? He said, what's that, Cam? I said, you're just a sad, irrelevant old cunt. And then we went in and sat down, and then it was 30 seconds and live. And there was Brian sitting next to Lisa Oren, steaming, purple in the face, steam coming out his ears, and launched into an attack on me. And then I said, and looked straight down the barrel of the gun, I'm so disappointed to hear that, Brian. I have immense respect for you.
You should write a book on media studies, Cameron Slater.
After we got out of the studio, Brian Edwards came up and he said, Cam, that is the best performance of upsetting somebody in the green room that I have ever seen. And I am now going to tell all of the people that I'm training in media, watch out for Cam.
Great story.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much. Just so enlightening. I think you're incredibly on the mark with so many of the things you say. I do have to give you a quick quote from, everyone thinks it's from Winston Churchill, but it's claimed on the internet that Winston Churchill only used it. It wasn't his quote. And it was, if you're a socialist at 20, you have no, sorry, if you're not a socialist at 20, you have no heart. If you're still a socialist at 30, you have no brain. And I think that's a wonderful quote that we should all adhere to. Okay.
He's 70.
Are you over 30? Right. Well, I'm 75 next birthday. I can walk into a forest and be the oldest living thing there. So. Okay. We've got next is someone who again will need. None of the field tonight need an introduction, so I don't know what the hell you're paying me the big salary to be an MC for. You are paying me, right? I didn't think so, right.
Check the days need with checkers.
Okay, so, Simon Lusk is going to tell us a little bit, but I think I should just pick up a couple of things that Cam put in the notes to me. He said, I don't want this to be about the past and looking back all the time. Well, we've done a pretty lot of that. He said, I don't want it to be a greatest hits tour. I want to be looking forward to the things that we're doing. And if anyone starts coming across as either whiny or needy, we'll chuck them out. Oh, okay. Well, we are going to focus on the future a little bit. Now, can I ask Simon Lusk to come up and join Cameron at the podium here?
Yeah, when Cam and I discussed this at the very beginning, I said, mate, like, you don't want this to be a greatest hits tour. We always talk about how Helen Clark and John Key have delusions of relevance. And, you know, they do. They're in the media and they just annoy everyone. And look, those guys are long gone, and Cam is still here. So when I started doing stuff with Cam, people at National would come up to me and they say, oh, it's really unhelpful working with Cam. And I go, unhelpful to who? And I was winning campaigns working with Cam, and, you know, he was stitching up people we didn't like, and it was all huge fun. And National, oh, no, very unhelpful. And that was... it's still the same. They still say exactly the same thing, and Cam's still here. And the only two that are still here from National are Judith and Jerry Brownlee. But I think that various speakers have touched on how the media is changing. And the media is changing, and it is a lot about following personalities, and it's about having an authentic voice, not just what gets churned out essentially by someone that's been trained to be a communist. And Cam has been pretty good at breaking stories, and mate, keep talking about the stories you're going to break in the future. No one cares about Len Brown. They probably don't even remember who he is. Who? And as an example of what's happening in campaigning around the world, the Republicans went everywhere at the last election. The Democrats didn't. They just couldn't bring themselves to go with the people that are Cam's equivalent in the US, go and do interviews, talk to them, talk direct to camera. And, you know, the media has changed, and Cam has a platform, and all of you here are part of that platform, and it's much, much easier to win a campaign with someone like Cam on your side than ignoring him. And for some reason, the parties apart from New Zealand First tend to ignore him, and I think that Cam was instrumental in helping Winston's campaign last time, especially with helping getting down to Parliament. And that is something that you can expect a lot of in the future. The people that talk direct to the audience or to someone that has a following like Cam or even Pinko, they will be the ones that succeed. Where others who go through the mainstream media, which is largely dead, I mean, who trusts the mainstream media now? And while we're not really supposed to be looking backwards, in 2012, Obama's campaign communications guy kept reinforcing that the average American gets 4 minutes of political media every day. And I think that's probably even less. And, you know, Cam and I are still going to be doing this in 20 years. I'm not sure there's going to be many others around. Who do you think will be there in 20 years, Cam?
that I will have slayed them all anyway.
Yeah, as soon as they become a politician, they're a target, unless it's Derek and Winston and a few others, they're our friends.
I'm just going to stop you there for a sec. At the last election, people were saying, oh, you're a lock for New Zealand First, you're this for New Zealand First. No, actually, New Zealand First spoke to me, the MPs spoke to me, they talked to me, and all I did was let them speak, whether it was on my radio show or it was guest posts or something like that. It staggers me, even after I won an election for the National Party in 2014, that the fuckers don't bother even picking up the phone or sending something or just talking. I don't want anything for it. I'm not being paid. I certainly wasn't paid by New Zealand First or any other politician for that matter, ever. All I want to do is talk to people, which is why I'm doing the podcast. That's why I'm looking forward to doing those things and having those conversations. And that's what it's all about. Now, if New Zealand First are smart enough to pick up the phone or spend some time over a cigar or whatever, well, I'm going to talk to them because I just want to talk to people all the time. And that's how I gather information. It's how I've always gathered information. So I'm not preferring anybody, they're preferring me.
Yeah, that's bullshit, Cam. You're preferring Winston.
Oh, yeah. Winston Raymond Peters, St Mary's Bay.
Look, there's a couple of things that I recommend you all do to see where politics is travelling. The first is that a Pommy guy called Matt Goodwin, who does a lot of numbers and says a lot of really, really good stuff. And you'll see quite a lot of what he says reflected in New Zealand. Because things like trannies are not very popular. It's sort of an 80-20 of the population think that they shouldn't be in women's sport and they shouldn't be in women's spaces. You read the mainstream media and you think Winston's evil for just saying what 80% of people think.
Exactly.
It's just nuts. But anyway, follow him. And you really want to read Chris Trotter if you want to understand some of the deeper stuff that is happening online.
He's got a Substack, subscribe to it.
Got to subscribe to
Worth
it. He is the guy that Cam and I discuss his articles and comments more than anyone else because he tells us stuff that we sort of think we might know, but he codifies it and he makes us better at politics because we read what.
Yeah, I often just message Simon or David and said, have you seen what Trotter's written? No, because it's that worthwhile that us people who live and breathe in politics, Chris Trotter's a must read.
And a must subscribe. You've got to subscribe to his Substack.
Yep, subscribe to Chris's Substack, it's worth it.
So looking forward to the next election, I think that what we're really going to see the most of is more alternative media outlets having more impact on the election, and we're going to see a lot of, especially ACT and New Zealand First, talking direct to voters and not letting the media filter it out and put their spin on it. And, Derek, you'd agree with that. We just work hard on making sure the media can't stitch us up. And, that's something that is going to continue. The mainstream media, Radio New Zealand's audience is dying. The other ones don't have much in the way of credibility. Following people like Cam and David and Chris Trotter, you're going to learn a whole lot more than what you will in the mainstream media.
Well, we just deal with reality. I saw that at the last election with the so-called freedom movement, which wasn't that free, actually, if you were inside it. But there was this absolute batshit crazy belief that they just ignored what I'd say. I'd say, this isn't going to work. Matt King was a classic example. I said, mate, you're not going to win. And he said, no, I am, because everybody I talk to say, oh, good on you, man, I'm going to vote for you. I said, I bet if you did a poll, you'd come fourth. And he didn't do that, so I arranged a poll, and he came fourth. I said, well, you could put in a National Party candidate, could be a donkey in Northland, where the Blue Road's there. It is. And they would vote for him. And then David will confirm this. Matt King rang him up after we ran the poll and said, can you run a poll for me, David? I said, sure thing. Ran a poll, and guess where he came? Fourth. And then in the election, the best poll of all, guess where Matt King came? Fourth. right? Liz Gunn, same. She was a well-meaning narcissist. But she didn't have a clue about how to get elected. I mean, she came out with some batshit crazy stuff about she was going to get 1 million votes just from Southland, or some insane thing. I was saying to everybody, don't listen to her. She's just wrong. And what happened in the election? Well, she sucked up 4% of the vote, which cost a few, MPs that could have been more sensible, right? A few more Winston's MPs, candidates could have been in there. And that's what she did. She stuffed it up for everybody, and then poof, disappeared. But everyone said I was a traitor for saying it. Oh, you've got to get on board. And you know what? No, I don't.
And you can't argue with Farag's numbers. I mean, Matt King was just, he complained about how Farag designed the poll. So I had the first one funded. The second one, Matt paid for himself and insisted on a change in question. And what, did he go up a little bit? But he still was fourth. These things are political reality, and you don't see a lot of that in the media, and that's what you tend to get from Cam and David, and definitely as well with Chris from the left.
Well, I get asked for advice, and I always couch when people ask me, "Oh, can you give me advice?" I said, well, yeah, I can, but will you do anything with it? And they usually don't have an idea. They just ask me a question, and they do that with David as well with polling. They don't like the answer, so they just ignore you and then lose. And I don't mind giving advice, but I'll give advice to anybody who wants to get into podcasting or blogging or writing and do all that. I've given heaps of advice, but it takes a bloody lot out of you, I've got to say. A lot out of you, personally, mentally, physically, to do what I do. And so every time I see someone starting up a blog and they're going to beat Cam Slater, I just sort of shrug, do you want a hand?
Okay.
Anyway, Morris, that's plenty from me.
We're coming to the end of our time here.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to come to one of the highlights of the evening, where we're going to have a man who has just given up the portfolio of being the Deputy Prime Minister, but he still is very much in charge of a lot of things, and I wanted to just tell a couple of stories. I wanted to first reflect on one lovely story I picked up from Simon Lusk and polling. And I recall a few ministers sitting around one night in my office actually, and Tim Grosser, who was a List MP, and he never wanted to ever be a constituent MP, because he'd have to do all those vulgar things like shake hands with constituents and talk to people. And he was sitting around saying one night, he was panicking. He was really panicking because polling coming out of New Lynn was suggesting he might actually win the seat. And he said, God, what do I do if I win the seat? And Murray McCully had one of the best lines I've ever heard. He said, Tim, you needn't worry. He said, if it looks closer to the day you're going to win, we'll arrange for a tour of the electorate by your 3 ex-wives. That would have put it to bed, I can promise you. So, a couple of things about Winston. I had to be very careful here because I don't want to piss him off a lot. But I did a lot of theatre sports at the beginning of my time in Parliament and went out with Jim Hopkins and a whole stag of people, Gary McCormick. And I used to do some funny lines about the National Party. So I went into my archives and I found that unfortunately, Winston, the bit I did about you wasn't that bad. I said that Paul East had established an enviable reputation for working into the wee small hours of the afternoon. Doug Graham taught us to be culturally sensitive. He taught us that Koha meant gift and quota meant even bigger gift. I actually said at one stage Lockwood got to be our Minister of Education because he was the only one amongst us with UE. Winston thought he had UE, but it turned out to be only hives. And I also said that Lockwood was the only man in our cabinet who was named after a house. That's if you exclude Winston, who was named after a concrete block. But a couple of stories that I will tell before we get them up. Murray McCully and I were brand new. We got elected in '87, and we were like cannon fodder. You weren't allowed to speak. You didn't get to take part in the general debate. You didn't get to ask questions. So sitting right, I'm the very last in the rank because they rank you alphabetically, and Williamson got to be last. Murray McCully reckoned it was based on IQ, but I promise it was on surname. And one day he came to me and he said, I've got a dozen tickets to Athletic Park this afternoon to Wellington playing North Harbour, because Murray was the MP for North Harbour, or for East Coast Bays. And I said, but we can't, it was a Wednesday, and I said, but we can't leave Parliament and go to Athletic Park and watch a rugby match. And he said, well, why not? And I said, well, we haven't got leave, and you wouldn't get leave for that. He said, but there's a general debate, we're not in it. There's question time, we're not in it. They won't know whether we've gone or not, we'll be fine. So I said, okay, well, we better sneak out the back way through Museum Street, because if we go out the front door, someone will spot us. And yeah. So we arranged to make downstairs, out the back, going down the steps to hop in a taxi, and somebody comes popping out from underneath the concrete stairs. And where do you guys think you're going? Now, he was really senior. I mean, he was up there with the Bulgers and the real senior people, like Philip Burton and so on. He'd been there for a while, and they looked down at us as like little third formers that were sort of faggers at the school. And I don't know. And I made this stupid answer to him. Nowhere. And he said, well, why have you got a taxi? And I went, he says, you're going to Athletic Park, aren't you? How many tickets you got? And Murray says, I've got 12. He says, I'll come with you. We jumped in the taxi, and off we went to Athletic Park, had a great time, watched the rugby, got back to Parliament, and everything was all okay until somebody spilled the bloody beans. So Bolger hauls McCully and I over the bloody coals at the next caucus meeting. Young people like you should not be going. And then I said, well, is Winston going to say anything? And he didn't. But Ross Muran put his hand up and said, I went as well. Okay, well, so we all lost a month's leave. And I have to say that it was one of the most memorable occasions sitting at them. And a really good story about him that I really still hold very dearly. When I did my valedictory speech, there's a speech you give when you're leaving the place. All your family and friends and that come down from Auckland. It's hard if you're an Auckland MP, it's not so bad if you're Wellington. And my wife and a whole lot of others, my kids and that came down. But they all had things the next morning, so they booked for the last plane out. And by the time about 10 o'clock came and we cleaned out all the food in my office and we cleaned out the drinks and everything was done, everybody had left and I was about to just trundle off back to my apartment and the phone rings. And it's Winston, he says, what are you doing now? I said, well, I'm going to go. He said, oh, rubbish. He says, come with us. We'll go down to the Green Parrot. I said, well, when? He said, just come over first to New Zealand First. So I went over, had a few drinks with a number of the New Zealand First MPs, and we got in some taxis and went down and spent till quite late that night. And I tell you, that makes a hell of a lot. You're in a bloody parliament with the whole team, and not one of them even spoke to you for the night. And someone from another team who's supposed to be on the other side asks you to come for a drink. It's the absolute calibre of the man. So all I can say is, Winston, I want to see you in Parliament, not with a cowboy hat, but with a MAGA hat. But I want your hat to say, make Aotearoa great again. That's the hat I want to see from Winston. Ladies and gentlemen, please let me present Winston Peters.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to make it very clear, I don't hold a grudge.
When you get even, you
And
forget
this
it.
eclectic crowd tonight proved it. I don't hold a grudge. The moment I get even with a prick, I forget it. When I first met Cam, he was 8 years of age. About your place, John. And he was paying a lot of attention to the conversation then. In fact, I thought far too much so. For a young guy. But obviously he was very, very keen to learn and find out. And you know, I spent nearly all my life, Cam, practicing for a time to roast a journalist, and here I am. Oh, by the way, could you, no, this should have been as a warning at the start. Have you turned off your cell phones? We don't want no defamation cases. And don't worry about defamation cases. The reality is that if you better go to court, you better put it on the line. It's enormously expensive. Far too many people in this country who should be making a stand never do. And when you do make a stand, think, well, that's fantastic, but they don't realize it costs hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. And Cam and I know that, or perhaps we more than Cam. It's not because we're litigation happy. We just don't want lies to get away with this, with their cheating and deceit. And that's why it's important. But tonight, Cam, you talked to the guy that you used to call the pensioner from St. Mary's Bay. I was hoping that they would tell you or remind you, but 10 years ago I got this invitation. And one of my staff wrote back and said, "This is from me. Tell them to go and get you know what." But the reality of it is, as you get older, you learn certain fundamental things. It's a bit like a famous song from Phil Collins. You've got to hear both sides of the story. It's critical in both your private life and your professional life. And look, I've had more rows with Barry Soper than you've had hot dinners. The first time we had a row, he bailed me up and said, "Oh, so you've been moaning about us and the way we treated a guy called Keith Allen." I said, "Who's this guy? I only got there 5 minutes ago." And then so we're having a blazing round. I thought, this is getting nowhere. So I said to him, "Look, why don't we come and have a beer?" And that's how we resolved it. Not that there haven't been a lot of rows in the past and over the years, but the point is, at the critical time, you get to realize who is of value, who believes in, dare I say it? And I'm going to pay a very clear to you, Chris, I believe in this. There's a thing called the romance and glamour of great principles. Whether you believe it or not, some of us do believe it. Otherwise, there's no explanation for our lives hanging around here this time of life. This is 50 years on the trail. That's half a century for this. But there is a romance and glamour of great principles, and there's some politicians who understand it. And I'm so pleased when Chris raised the issue tonight about 1952, because those were dramatic years. First, the Labour Party dropped its state ownership plan of all land, got elected, and by 1949, the National Party realised, "I know what we'll do, it's so good, we'll change it and we'll give it a new name. We'll call it a capital, property owning democracy. We'll rephrase it. We'll call it a property owning democracy. We'll make housing and housing, health, education, first world elevation by way of education for everybody, and first world wages. Just those 4 fundamental things. And boy, what great years we had. And I reflect and look back now at a time in Australia. First of all, there was Menzies for 21 years. Then they had Bob Hawke. Whether you like Bob Hawke or not, he was one bright guy. I regard him as somebody I knew close enough to call him a friend of mine. And then they had John Howard after that. All those long years of stability. And you're quite right, whether it's the left or the right, it's whether they know what they're doing and what they're doing with the country. But we're not here to talk about politics, we're here to talk about campus labour. I'm just pleased that he had an epiphany on his way to petition, And I know, Cam, you don't believe me, but I think you're not a bad guy after all. And after all, it's in the good book. I hope you guys read still now and again, ladies and gentlemen. There's nobody beyond redemption. That's why we're here tonight. Well, by the way, I wanted to share with Cam. You're talking about, writing articles and what have you. This is still my most favourite one when it comes to both sides of the story, or considering all elements of an issue. Or to put it most critically, so many people in politics lose out, or journalism lose out, because they don't put the writer on first. I'll give you an example. You might say there are far too many women who are on the sole purpose benefit, getting support from the state, right? Now, no matter what you say after that, you're going to lose half the crowd. But if you say there are a whole lot of women whose men and families have let them down, they've been victims of brutality, and evil behavior. Despite that, we help them through the future, and we're going to go on doing that. But then there are some who are supporting the taxpayer. Everyone that you mentioned in the first category will be in that audience. They'll all think they're the first category. They won't think they're second one. But there's so many people in politics, and dare I say it, journalism, they let forth a mighty blast, and as everybody's leaving the door, they then put the rider on next. Well, it's too late then, and you've lost. And that's how we're going to win the next election, by the way.
Well, this is all about Canberra.
Well, this is
Right now.
This is what I want Cam to understand. This was one of the greatest speeches ever made. It's a very brief speech. But this person's asked sort of very late in the piece, during the time of Prohibition in Mississippi, way back in 1952, he's asked to speak on the subject of Prohibition. No preparation, no time to get up on his feet. He's on his feet and he says this: "My friends, I had not intended to discuss this controversial subject at this particular time. However, I want you to know that I do not shun controversy. On the contrary, I will take a stand on any issue at any time, regardless of how fraught with controversy it might be. You've asked me how I feel about whiskey, all right. Here's how I feel about whiskey." Now, can we stop and remember this? And he goes on, "If when you say whiskey, you mean the devil's brew, the poison scourge, the bloody monster that defiles innocence, dethrones reason, destroys the home, creates misery and poverty, yea, literally takes the bread from the mouths of little children, if you mean the evil drink that topples the Christian man and woman from the pinnacle of righteous, gracious living into the bottomless pit of degradation and despair and shame and helplessness and hopelessness, then certainly I'm against it. But sound like him? If when you say whiskey, you mean the oil of conversation, the philosophic wine, the ale that is consumed when good fellows get together, that puts a song in their hearts and laughter in their lips, and the warm glow of contentment in their eyes, if you mean Christmas cheer, if you mean the stimulating drink that puts the spring in an old gentleman's step on a frosty, crispy morning, if you mean the drink that enables a man to magnify his joy and his happiness, and to forget that only for a little while life's great tragedies and heartaches and sorrows, if you mean that drink the sale of which pours into our treasuries untold millions of dollars, which are used to provide tender care for our little crippled children, our blind, our deaf, our dumb, our pitiful, aged and infirm, to build highways and hospitals and schools, then certainly I'm for it. This is my stand. I will not retreat from it. I will not compromise. Sound like you can?
pretty much.
Anyways, can I just say some funny things, talking about politics? Of the funniest things I saw in my time in politics. One time, the National Party was pretty good, but the Labour Party, Longy was getting up, he was making the speech, and he was telling so many jokes at the same time, it was so funny, that one of my colleagues at the time, now excuse me, this is a fact, ladies and gentlemen, but she went away, and she got a big piece of white paper, and on it she wrote these letters. And the next time that Longy got ready to tell his joke, she was going to flip it around and show his Labour Party colleagues what to do. So Longy tells the next joke, and she goes like this. See what's on there?
No.
CLAP. To which Longy says, "Well, thanks for the warning." It's a 12 past pass it on to one of us. Don't be mad, it's contagious. All the time this Labour Party called out over Anderson. We were forced to buy these frigates from Australia, so this arrangement the Labour Party entered in 1988 was to buy 4 frigates from Australia, you recall that? And so across from Australia, we're going to have them built in Australia of all places. So across from Australia came this admiral to explain to the Parliamentary Select Committee why we'd be doing it. And they came across and he was in full regalia, all white gear, and his sword, the full 100 yards, you know. And in his talk to convince the Select Committee, he said, look, we all know, of course, and this is the reason why we're building it in the Southern Hemisphere, we all know that the configuration of the waves, or the wave configuration, is different in the Southern Hemisphere than the Northern Hemisphere. Muldoon had his classic way, you know that, Morris. He had his classic way of looking around saying, excuse me, what did you say? And he said again, well, we all know that the wave configuration is so important, that's why we're building in the Southern Hemisphere. The wave configuration is so much different in the Southern Hemisphere than the Northern Hemisphere. And Muldoon looks around the room and says, well, thank God Captain Cook didn't know that. Ladies and gentlemen, can I just say, a lot of the comments tonight I do agree on. I do agree. In many contexts, the fact is that this country has dramatically changed. And changed sadly for do I believe, by accident? No, I think we've had far too much of our education system has crept in over decades, changing of the standards we used to have. And the ability to teach what you like, whether or not it was approved by, first of all, the parents, and that's what in loco parentis means.
Yes.
In the feet of the parents. They have been ignored. And when it comes to university, society has been ignored as well. It's unbelievable what's being taught at the moment. And I don't want to turn this into a political argument, but the reality is... No, I'm not turning it into a political argument. I'm making the argument.
So just for me.
Yeah, but well, the point is, we want our students to come out of university with the best possible education, but a balanced education where they've heard both sides of the story.
Yes.
It's the essence of freedom. It's the essence of freedom of speech, for goodness sake. These are the fundamentals. Why can't we talk to everybody? That's why I'm talking to you.
A wise man.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I could go on all night about how important this is, but the fact is, 37 years ago, at the Wellington Club, we've forgotten here, buddy, but I made a speech about journalism dying in our country because they were not given the resources, the time and the space to be the profession they should be. And I watched with great sadness at a profession that's critical of democracy, after all, where I've had a great admiration for journalists, very bright journalists, seriously talented, but they just have not had the resources and the space. And for a small population like that, like ours, it's no excuse, because Ireland still has it, with a lesser population. Other new emerging democracies like Croatia has it, with a lesser population. We just somehow been starved of that, and as a consequence, all the alternatives, which may be inevitable in the first place, have crept up. But I do admire the social media, Gavin. I do read your stuff and everything else, if I can afford it. But people don't realise you've only got so much in the way of resources. And the National Party, the last game had 25 million, the ACT Party had 16 million, and we had 1 million. Right?
Yeah.
Have you read that in the newspapers?
Yep.
No, bad that TV's going out there, but you might see it tomorrow, but that's the truth. I mean, they give you a microlight, and they expect you to fly to the moon, and take them with you. I'm not complaining about you, you thought about it, somebody else didn't. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to talk to you tonight, about Cam's career and his 20 years. I think he's shown enormous courage, by the way, Cam. Mr. Roach, stop. You've shown enormous courage and stuck at it, through thick and through thin, and that is to be admired. The halcyon years, though, the better years, I'm certain, are yet to come. So, the glass, where's your glasses? Pick your glass? Well, that's my, I'm going to touch it. Cam. Get down to the serious business. You can and your career.
People have mentioned the lawsuits and things like that. What many people don't know, and I didn't know this until about a year ago. I was in the middle of the lawsuits, and all of a sudden I got a phone call from a guy called Brian Henry. Now, he's in Thailand at the moment, he can't be here, but he's an absolute treasure of a guy. I can remember him coming to see me in the hospital after I had my stroke, and he said to me, sign these bits of paper, Ken. I said, what's that? It's going to make it all go away. And I was like thinking, you know, I'm probably going to die anyway. It was about 2 or 3 days in. And what he was bringing to me was bankruptcy papers. And I said, this means you won't get paid, Brian. He said, I'd rather have a mate than wait for a deal to be paid. And the person who put him up, introduced me to him, or arranged for it to happen, and I didn't know this, was Winston. And he saw he was talking to his staff, and he said, this is wrong, these guys suing Cam. Get Henry onto it. And I didn't know that until about a year ago, and I found that out from a third party. So, Brian Henry is a dear friend. I owe him a lot. But also Winston for putting his friend, Brian Henry, my way.
I wasn't talking to him at the time.
And that's the point. Winston wasn't talking to me at the time, and he still did it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the final little run. Cam did say to me, can we ask if there's anyone that likes to make a little 1 or 2 minute vignette? Anything you wanted to make a comment on, please feel free to. Before you do, just think about it if you want to. I just want to make a plea to Winston on one issue. And he heard me rabbit on about this years ago when we were in government at the beginning of the 90s, and I pleaded with the cabinet and with Bolger and others to sell Television New Zealand. I was Minister of Broadcasting, and I kept saying to them, there's stuff coming, and Bill Birch used to call it the interweb, and I said, there's stuff coming that will change the entire paradigm of how we get our information, how we shop, how we're educated. I was always a bit of a techo freak, and I said, Television New Zealand's worth around 1.2 billion at this stage. It had the entire audience market. Everyone watched only TV1 or TV2. TV3 had gone into receivership. And I pleaded with the cabinet, and in the end I got it back. They passed it back 3 times. I couldn't get it through. And the reason was, from Jim Bolger himself, he said, because TV1 in particular, not 2 so much, but TV1, was the promotion of New Zealand culture, and without it we wouldn't have an avenue to promote our culture. So when I spoke on my valedictory night, I said I want to read you the schedule for TV1 tonight. After the news and 7 sharp, we have a program called The Great Aussie Bake Off, followed by The Worst House in the Street UK, and as a topping off of the evening, Coronation Street. That is what that piece of junk, which is now worth about 300 million if you're lucky and dying by the day, and my plea to you, Winston, and any of your colleagues is, we do not need to own that piece of rubbish anymore. Get rid of it, because you can sometimes watch the news, 6 stories in a row will be an attack on the government. Because one after another, and that is not what any media should be, let alone state-owned. Anyway, that's my plea for you. Now, I just wanted to have the mind on the side as well tonight. Anybody want to make a quick one? Come over.
Hello, and great day, Cam, great night.
Before Paul gets started here, he's the guy who came up with a name for where will be cooked.
We were sitting in the office, and I just thought I can't not tell this story if I haven't got an opportunity. Sitting in the office, and Rob, my repossessor, who was stealing cars from me and selling them to the scrap heap, who I eventually sacked, was saying that he because some police officer had just been shot with a 22 Slaker. I don't know if you remember that happening in Christchurch somewhere. And there was boy races causing all sorts of trouble. And he said, Rob, he was my debt collector, my repossessor, he was a hard man, he was the only white black power guy. So he was white and black power. And he sat in the office and he said, they should crush those cars when they get them of those speed races. And I said, Cam, that wouldn't be a bad idea. So Cam says, off phone, dare I say it, Judith, we'll not hear it in a minute, but Judith tells the Prime Minister, the next day on the news we hear that Crusher Collins is going to be crushing the cars for folk that do speed racing or any of this wheeling or all the silly stuff in motor vehicles, which saddened me because I used to do that as a youngster myself. But that was something that went from a guy in my office to Cam, to a contact, to the Prime Minister, to law. And I think that was one of our finer moments. We have hundreds of fine moments, but that was a moment.
Thank you, Lars. Don't see any more hands, so I just want to make an apology. We've got a hand down the back. Come on up.
I learned that, by the way, from my grandmother. Morris used to remember Dad would have on New Year's Day, I think it was it New Year's Day or day after New Year's Day? And Dad would have all these national MPs and ministers and everybody around, and they'd proceed to get absolutely blown-faced drunk. And Grandma would be in the kitchen, and one day they were talking about all the terrible bills that they were having to pay in health through supplying food for people in hospital. And Grandma pipes up from the back and she says, make them pay! And there was a bit of a rush of shit to the brains for all the politicians because they actually did it. And National suffered hugely as a result of the part payment because Grandma's logic was pure Grandma's logic. Well, if they're not at home, they're in the hospital, they're not eating the food at home, so make them pay for when they're in the hospital. And it was brilliant, but it cost National a lot, but that was my grandmother.
You know what television minister was that put it up?
You.
Okay, so a very quick story. There are a few here that might know. So there is a, don't worry about it, Scam. There is a few of us here that basically we organise a gun shoot twice a year, and it continued for quite a while. Continued through Jacinda's gun buyback. That was very memorable. But anyway, one time we were holding it. Cam didn't turn up because he had a stroke. About 2 years, I think it was after his stroke.
No, it was about 9 months later.
No. This is about 2 years later after his stroke. No. Shush, my story.
You're going to hear both sides.
Yeah. So, alright. 2 years after his stroke. About 2 years, maybe 18 months. Anyway, so Cam had been coming and he was okay with the clays, I guess, before that. And after his stroke, we were like, hell yeah, Cam shipped the clays now. But I remember about 18 months, 2 years after his stroke, and he wins what we affectionately call the Cows for Me Memorial Trophy. So if anyone remembers or knows, or is a long time well, Cows for Me was a farmer down south who had a particular way and was well loved. Anyway, so we named a trophy after him. Anyway, so Cam is shooting these clays after a stroke, and each time he's sitting there, he's loading, and you can see shaking and everything else. And he pauses and he waits, and he got 9 out of 10, wins the trophy, 18 months of a stroke, and that just goes to the dedication that he puts in, the effort he puts in towards his rehabilitation. That's all we can
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just, yes, two ladies, one over another. Just this one. There's a hand behind you as well, but she was only pointing out you. So there we go.
Hi there, I'm Penny Marie, and not many people know me, but thanks to Cam and reinvigorating independent media, I actually got more views on my interview with Cam than Mr. Peters did. So I just want to say, well actually I'm up here because I got the because I just said, there hasn't been any women speaking tonight. Where's the woman's voice? And so I just got dared to come up here and do that. But I just want to thank you, Cam, because we do need independent media. And I'm quite new at it, and it's amazing to connect with people like you who have been in the game for a long time to show us how to do it, because mainstream is not speaking the voice of the people. And the way that you guys have been talking tonight about if we want our leaders and our people to connect with the people of New Zealand, it relies on us grassroots people. So thank you. Thank you for all the others that have been
Okay, there was another hand, yes. While she's making her way up here, I'll just make the apology to Winston. I'd agree with Derek in that I would say that when Winston was asked to participate in the question time in 10 years of Cam being in the blogging field, and when they asked Winston, he did have 2 words as his reply, and it was not bon voyage, so.
Thanks, Ross. My name's Marie Busby, and I had the great pleasure to work with Cam at RCR Media, and I want to talk a little bit about courage, because for a lot of us in this room, and there's been a lot of talk tonight of courage, and I don't think there's been enough talk actually about how much courage you've shown to a great many people in this room, including me, including my husband over there, for the courage that you've shown. The courage that you've shown in your health, the courage you've shown in your family, the courage you've shown in media, the courage that you've shown to stay the course after 20 years in politics and actually have to face down, no offence Morris, no offence Mr. Peters, no offence Mr. Soper, but you know, people out there in the sphere.
Is that the offence?
Well, yeah, look, I'm just thrilled that Chloe's not here. I've got plenty to say about her on my show, but anyway, I digress. But courage is actually something that I think as Kiwis we've forgotten. We've been a country of courage, and Cam, you have never wavered. And I want to thank you personally for the friendship and support and mentoring that you've shown me on my independent media journey. And, you know, for the people, a lot of people here will know that there is a marshmallow heart of gold under there. And when the shit hits the fan, and my husband and I have gone through, we've had our fair share of shit sandwiches over the last 5 years, and we're the first people to send me a text or a phone call saying, come on girl, keep on going, get going, you know, pick yourself up, fuck them, has been Cam. So I just want everyone to charge your glasses to courage and slow.
Right, I think we're coming to an end. Cam, do you want a final word?
Yeah, of course, I've got a few.
Okay, please do. I think we're going to regret this one.
You'll have to excuse my memories, not that flash. I have to sometimes read things these days rather than just make them up on the fly. But, you know, I was shaking earlier tonight, just waiting for everybody to come, thinking, oh my God, what's this going to be like? You know, you always have worries about, you know, sitting down with someone like Winston. I mean, the guy's wily old fox. I mean, that last time I was at your place and rolled home about 2 a.m. and you were worried that I was going to drive, because you could just imagine the scene if the police pulled me over and I said, oh, I've just been drinking with Winston. But, you know, we sat there around your kitchen bench, and we yarned about history and politics and everything in between. And I'm sitting there, you know, I think we drank about half a bottle of scotch or something. Winston smoked 5 cigars. I was spewing out at about 3. But this is the thing, right? It's like when you sit down and talk to politicians away from cameras or you know, in a social setting, and it's longer than about 20 or 30 minutes, you get to know them better than anybody else does because you take the time to listen. And that's the thing that you know, I used to, I blame the National Party for it, right? For 30 years, Winston's been attacked or longer by the National Party. You know, they feared him when he was in the National Party. You know, I can remember Winston at Mum and Dad's place, and we had a couple of fireplaces, and Winston was by one, and he had a scotch in one hand, a cigarette in the other, and that was resting up on the mantelpiece, warming the derriere by the fire. And he had about 10 or so MPs around him, and they're all going on, and Winston's holding court. And sitting over my mum's grand piano, she had a couple of you know, wing chair type things, and Jim Bolger was sitting on one, and now they were funny chairs because they had little short legs on them, and they were quite low down. What you probably don't realise is most politicians are short. It just, I don't know what it is, they just are. And anyway, Jim Bolger was sitting there, and I was talking to him, this, you know, hi, you know, I think I would have been about 14 or something like that. And I said, oh, how's about that Jim McLean? Yeah, he's not here tonight. And Jim Bolger's always a nice fellow, very nice fellow. Don't think he'll be a leader for too much longer. And about 3 weeks later, he knifed him. And that's my upbringing in those sorts of things. And so I've tried to use that knowledge about how politicians think and drink and smoke. Yeah, actually, you know what? Helen Clark's got a lot to answer for. Before Helen Clark, politics had smoke-filled rooms. Smoke-filled rooms and whiskey. And people who opposed each other would sit down and have a fag. Some of them had a cigarette too. But I was there in the middle of it. I mean, there's a podcast coming out next week with Lee Taitua. And he was involved in the Kingi-Tanga movement and worked with Bob Mahuta, Sir Robert Mahuta. And we were talking in the podcast. And he said, you know what? He said, that Sealord deal, it nearly came undone. And I said, let me guess, it was eels. And he said, how did you know that? And I remember sitting in Doug Kidd's office, and he smoked like a train. And he was sitting there talking all these national MPs, ministers. Bill Birch was there, heaps of them. Eric Roy, they were talking about the Sealord deal, and Doug Kidd said, in between drags on the cigarette, why don't you go, you know that deal was nearly upended because of fucking eels. And those were his exact words, and I remember those words to this day. And he was dead right. They put together the Sealord deal and had forgotten to include eels in the Sealord deal. And Bob Mahuta was pushing for this, but here was Lee Taitua, a guy I'd never met before, telling the other side of the story that I'd seen the other side of, because I was sitting there in Doug Kidd's office. Dad was there. And that's what I'm trying to do with the podcast as well, to have conversations and listen to what other people have got to say. Because they've got pearls of wisdom, even if you might not agree with them. I mean, how many of you agree with Brian Tamaki? And here he is tonight here. He's a complete rascal, right? Winston's a complete rascal as well. But you can talk to them. Winston and I didn't see eye to eye for many years, and yet here he is tonight delivering, you know, a little message like that. I've been doing this for 20 years, 2 decades of hammering away at keyboards, stirring the pot, and let's be a little bit honest, I've ruffled more feathers than a fox in a hen house. We came here to celebrate 20 years of blogging, breaking stories, and more recently we've got the Good Oil podcast. Now I've got to thank Bex, where's Bex? Down the back there. Bex helps organise everything, and Craig, where are you? There I am. They've believed in me and what my vision is for where we want to go with the podcast and things like that. But you know what? I couldn't have done any of this, gone on this incredible wild ride. And you know, I talk about Nicky Harder and dirty politics and that because he just got it so fucking wrong. I mean, honestly, the things that we were joking about, he was writing like it was deadly serious. Like, it was nuts. And all these media people hijacked the election. For 6 weeks it was all about me, and I won the election for the National Party. And what thanks did I get with it? Well, I got cowardly John Key, who rang Dad up and said, oh, John, could you pass on a message to Cam? And Dad said, why don't you ring him yourself? He says, oh, no, I can't do that. Just tell him no hard feelings. And he's never spoken to me since. But I know he reads the blog, and every time I write about him, I finish every post with, hey John, I know you're reading this. No hard feelings. But I couldn't have done this without all of you guys, honestly. You know, whether you're a commenter or a subscriber, have been there since the beginning. Like some of the people here tonight, I know they've been here since the beginning. So it's a salute to all of you guys as well as me. I mean, I just do it because it's fun. I mean, what do they say? If you can do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, people say I'm lazy and whatever. I just reckon I'm smart. And I do what I love. I love the game of politics, and that's why I call it the game of politics, because it actually is fun. And people take it way too seriously, particularly on the left, and particularly if they're young and got strange eyebrows.
Unibrows.
When I started Wailoa back in 2005, not many people know this, but I was in a state of severe depression. And a good mate of mine spoke earlier, Paul. He came around and knocked on my door. And he said, oh, I hear you're not doing so good, Cam. I said, yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not doing very well at all. He said, well, come and sit at my office, and I'll give you a computer, and you can sit there and we'll do some things, and I don't know, just come and just get out of the house. And he said to me, you know, everyone's got shit to deal with in their life. And he told me a story too about some things he's dealing with in his life. I thought, shit, you know what? Hey, that's actually worse than mine. But I went and sat in his office and I learned shitloads. You know, remember that show Dragon's Den? Yeah. Remember The Apprentice and they'd all go and work with Donald Trump and everything like that? Well, I got to do that with Paul. I got to sit in his office and watch a parade of people come through the door begging him for money to invest in their businesses. And it was a real life experience of just how dopey some people are. Like, honestly, not many people know this, but Paul's dyslexic, but fuck, he can read the balance sheet. You know? And so I learned a whole lot off him. And, you know, he's kind of been like a second dad to me. Not that he's taken the place of my father John, but he's kind of like been a mentor and a guide. And he's the one who came up with the name of Wailoa. But I never set out to win any popularity contest. Okay. That's probably a lie. Because I saw David Farrar blogging, and that's what got me started blogging, just a year afterwards. And I thought, no one likes coming second. I mean, can anyone remember who won the silver medal in the 1988 Olympics in the 100 metres. Carl Lewis. Carl Lewis, right? He was juiced, but he didn't get caught. The guy who beat him smashed it. But generally, silver medalists you don't remember who they are. No one wants to come second. It's like kissing Nana and she slips a tongue in. That's how gross it is coming second. So I set myself a goal. And I was going to be number one.
To be the travel and lifestyle blogger.
I decided I was going to be number one. And I set about doing it, and it didn't take me that long, actually. But David's right, he was part-time, I was full-time. And in that time, though, the media landscape back then was a sleepy little club. And I figured out it needed a kick in the pants. I'd seen Dad dealing with journalists and politicians, and I always say to him, no, you're too soft, Dad. You're too nice. If you're going to go, and I was brought up in the days of Eden Electric, you go to the meetings, you'd have a fist fight with the union guys and the Labour hecklers. Chris, you were probably at some of those meetings. That's when we learned how to sledge. And so I thought, well, we need to kick them in the pants. And so I started writing, and I haven't stopped. Except when I've been forced to, but I've exposed hypocrisy to broken stories like Len Brown. I dared to be different, and it pissed a lot of people off. Lying and fuck. And I still don't own it here. You can write bad things about me, you can write books about me, I've had 2 books written about me. You can try and shun me, you can try to ignore me, but I'm still here. And every politician that's been and gone, I'm still here. But we didn't just report the news, sometimes we made it. I can remember being on a radio show. I was actually on Radio Reba, and this person said, is this in the news yet? When I was talking about something, I said, no, but it will be. And the next day I did put it into the news, and it was, to do with the strike and things like that I was doing stuff at Auckland. Everyone who says that they loathe me, they still read me. The ones who love me, they're going to always love me. The ones who loathe me, they're still going to read me. I'm like the Western Springs Speedway. You don't go to Speedway to watch the racing. You go to Speedway to watch the crashes. So it hasn't been a leisurely stroll around the viaduct, taking in the air. I've taken hits, plenty of them. Lawsuits, bankruptcy, the stroke, and I've had plenty of death threats. I've been called everything from a fearless journalist to a hate machine, and I've got those in court rulings, so they must be true. Nikki Hager tried to paint me and David and Simon and a few others as villains in 2014. But every time they try to shut me down, I get back up. I just get back up. Truth doesn't care about your feelings, and neither do I. And this is the thing, there's a lot of these politicians that are there now, particularly in a couple of minor parties, they think they matter. And they don't. And in 10 years' time, we'll have waved the back of them out the door, and I'll still be telling them that they were useless. So now I've traded blog posts for podcasts. I still write blog posts. No one can mimic my style, not even AI. I'm going to keep doing it, what I've always done. I've challenged the narrative. I call out the nonsense, and I give a voice to those who feel ignored. Whether it's taking on troffers, living off taxpayer money, Jordan, you really should pay me.
You keep telling me.
Yeah, you get a whole lot better coverage if you did. Or poking holes in the latest woke dogma. I mean, it's bullshit, right? We're told that we have to entertain a person's delusion. I'm not entertaining anyone's delusion. I wouldn't tolerate it from Liz Gunn, I won't tolerate it from a bloke who thinks he's a Sheila. Right, he's not, he's a bloke. And he's got fifth. You know, they write that in the hospital, so no one knows what it means. FITA, it means fucked in the head. We've even exposed corruption, right, and given a voice to those the elite would rather ignore. I've made people squirm, but you know what? I've had a bloody good time going on. An amazing time, really. Every scoop, every headline, every viral post is a reminder that the truth doesn't need permission to be spoken. You know, I was the one who, as Barry said, the one who said that the lockdowns were illegal and I had the documents to prove it. He knew I had the documents. I knew I had the documents. I said it. They even poo-pooed Barry when he said it. We were right. I was right when I said that it was an orchestrated fit-up to stop Avi Yemeni coming to New Zealand. I had the documents, I had the receipts. And that's what a journalist should do, is they should keep receipts. Always keep receipts. I'd hate to see Barry's little bag of tricks. Right? There's stuff that you can do there or whatever. Anyway, I've gone on crapping on a whole lot. I've missed a whole lot of things I was going to write, but I'd be remiss if I didn't address the elephant in the room. My reputation. Look, I've been called everything from a right-wing attack dog, a smear merchant, and even a mendacious, bullshit-ridden blogger. Cheers for that one spin-off, Duncan Grief. Taxpayer leech. Yeah. But here's what they don't get. It's what Nikki Hager didn't get. It's what anyone on the left who criticises me doesn't get. I don't do this for applause. I do it because somebody's got to say what others won't. It's not about gossip, it's about accountability. When I call out academics pushing sugar taxes or politicians cozying up to foreign powers, Helen, talking about you, Don, you know where you get chicks from. It's about asking the hard questions. And yeah, I've made enemies. I've lost court cases, I paid fines, had my name dragged through the mud, but I've still got a Canon Media Award. That's not nothing. I built a platform that, despite moving and changing names and everything, has hundreds of thousands of hits a month. That's not nothing. But it hasn't been a solo act. I owe so much to readers, listeners, and the supporters who have always stood by me. You shared my posts, you tuned into my podcast, and you sent messages of encouragement when the going got tough. And when the going gets tough, you find out who your friends are. And let me tell you, you can count them on the fingers of one hand. All these politicians that I've known and met and all of that, when I had my stroke, only 2 contacted me or came to see me, saw me in the hospital. Only 2. Out of all of the ones that were there, am I disappointed? No. Because it's all about them. But you guys were all there through the lawsuits, the attacks, and the attempts to silence us. That's what dirty politics was. It was an attempt to silence a critical voice that was harming the narrative of the left. I was so effective at doing what I did that they had to hack me, commit crimes, commit hatchet jobs, and in some instances try and get me to commit suicide. And that's a story I haven't told too many people, but that's what Martin Bradbury and a few others were trying to do. They said it out loud, and people who were in that room told me that they said it out loud. And I said, fuck them. Yeah. I just stood there and took the whole lot. But you were all there. So this celebration that we've had tonight is as much yours as it is mine. So give yourselves a round of applause. The establishment doesn't like being challenged. No? If you stand up against the public health people, they try and sue you for calling them troffers. Well, I had a stroke, and Brian Henry said to me, Cam, you can be dead and right, or you can say sorry, even if you don't mean it, and walk away. And I wanted to live. I didn't say sorry though, I just walked away. So they come at you with everything, legal threats, smear campaigns, you name it. Even Winston threatened to sue me once.
Me too.
He got Brian Henry to ring me. Cam Slater, you write the Whale blog. Yep, I'm Brian Henry and I've been told to sue you. Man, whatever, Brian, fuck off. I didn't get sued by Brian Henry or Winston Peters. And here we are tonight. But every time that I've had something knock me down, I got back up, I dusted myself off and I keep swinging. Because the truth is worth fighting for. Because people want honest, unfiltered commentary. They deserve someone who won't back down. And because giving in to bullies just isn't in my DNA. Yeah, I've made mistakes. Plenty of them. I'm human. I'm not a saint. But I've strived to be authentic and I've never pretended to be something I'm not. What you see is what you get. A bloke who loves this country, believes in free speech, and isn't afraid to ruffle feathers. That's what kept Whale alive through the storms and what drives my podcast today. Tonight isn't just about looking back, it's about looking forward. And the world's changing and not always for better. Cancel culture is still lurking. I can remember during Dirty Politics, John Drennan from the New Zealand Herald, subsequently departed, was ringing all my advertisers and bullying them into cancelling their advertising. A journalist did that. A media journalist did that. The appalling things that the New Zealand Herald and their journalists, and not so much stuff in my experience, but the Herald in particular, have run vitriolic attacks against people, not just me but others as well. And if you knew what they got up to, and I do, it's kind of like watching sausages be made, you don't want to eat them afterwards. But somehow I'm here making sausages. So I'm not done, and for the next 20 years I'm going to be bigger and bolder and louder. We've got new platforms, new stories, new fights to pick. And I'm doubling down on telling it like it is, whether it's through my podcasts or videos or whatever comes next. And I want all of you with me to that right. I'm still standing, still talking, still making you mad, and I'm not going anywhere. So keep touching your pearls for all my detractors out there. I'll keep telling the truth. Before I want to wrap up, I want to thank my mates, my small and mighty staff team. There's a lot of people that do things for free for me. I appreciate it immensely. The moderators, some of the guys that do some of the sub-editing, the people who do some of the posts like the daily Bible verse and things like that. It's all people that are volunteering time because they care about the message and what they can deliver. And so I thank them, and I thank my family and those who are close to me. And all of those people have helped me keep that engine running behind the scenes, often no praise. People complain about the moderators all the time. Well, I just gave them one instruction: protect the blog. Anyone who doesn't protect the blog gets the land hammer. And we don't warn, we just drop it. So all those who help me, assist me, give me counsel, give me support, you all know who you are, and you know that I couldn't have done this without you. So everyone here tonight, really, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for believing in this mission. You're not just an audience, you're a community, a force, a bloody good bunch of Kiwis who refuse to be told what to think. So, here's to 20 years of breaking news, breaking barriers, and breaking the mold. And here's to the fights we've won, the ones we've lost, and the ones still to come. Raise your glasses. And let's toast to truth, to freedom, and to never backing down.
Okay, that's going to be it for the night, ladies and gentlemen. Well done, Cam, and well done, everybody else. Please stay on. There's going to be some music. The bar will stay open, so please frequent the bar. I've just got one quick line for you to use when you were talking about it's important to come first and not to come second. I'm going to finish the night with my lovely quote. When you're not the first dog in the sled team, the view never changes.